After 43 years of marriage, I thought I knew everything about my wife. I believed we'd grow old together, side by side. But then she dropped a bombshell that turned my world upside down. You won't believe what happened next. Stick around because this story is one you'll never forget, and it may even change how you see love and loyalty. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss stories like this. Linda and I met on a rainy September afternoon in college. She was hurrying across campus, balancing a stack of art books under one arm and shielding herself with a broken umbrella. I offered to walk her to her dorm with my umbrella, and by the time we reached her door, we were laughing like old friends. From that moment, it was as though the universe had decided we were meant to be. Our relationship was effortless. Linda had an artist's soul, full of passion, spontaneity, and a knack for seeing beauty in the mundane. I, on the other hand, was the pragmatist. She painted our lives in vibrant colors, and I built the sturdy frame to hold it all together. Together, we were unstoppable, or so I thought. Over the years, we built a life that felt like the definition of success. 2 incredible kids, a warm home filled with laughter, and a bond that seemed unshakable. We celebrated anniversaries with homemade pasta, exchanged heartfelt letters on birthdays, and made a point to never go to bed angry. But as our children grew up and moved out, something subtle began to shift. Our conversations, once brimming with excitement and curiosity, started revolving around the same old topics: retirement plans, grocery lists, and reruns of our favorite TV shows. While I found comfort in the familiarity, I noticed that Linda's eyes would sometimes wander, as if searching for something beyond the walls of our home. Looking back, I wonder if the very stability I cherished had become a cage for her. While I thought we were simply enjoying the rhythm of a well-lived life, perhaps she was yearning for a new melody altogether. At the time, though, I had no reason to question our love. We were partners, best friends, and the foundation of each other's lives. Or so I believed. It started with little things, so small that I didn't even register them as signs at first. Linda began staying longer at her art studio, claiming she was working on a new series of paintings. "It's a way to keep my creativity alive," she explained one evening, her voice light but distant. I smiled, proud of her dedication, but I couldn't help but notice that she rarely invited me to see what she was working on anymore. She also started dressing differently. Gone were her usual comfortable sweaters and jeans. In their place came flowing dresses and elegant blouses that seemed to accentuate her vibrancy. "Just trying something new," she'd say when I complimented her. She looked radiant, like the woman I'd fallen in love with decades ago, but there was an air of mystery about her now, as if she were carrying a secret too delicate to share. Then there were the smiles. Linda had always been a warm person, but lately, her smiles seemed reserved for someone or something I couldn't see. Sometimes, I'd catch her humming songs I didn't recognize while cooking dinner or gazing out the window with a faraway look in her eyes. I tried to convince myself that this was normal. After all, we were entering a new phase of life. The kids had moved out, and we had more time to explore our own interests. Maybe Linda was just rediscovering parts of herself that had been on pause while we were busy raising a family. But then came the late-night phone calls. At first, I didn't think much of it. A friend needing advice or one of our kids checking in, I assumed. But when I asked, Linda would always wave it off. "Just someone from my art class," she'd say, her tone too casual to feel convincing. One night, curiosity got the better of me. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter while grabbing a glass of water. A notification lit up the screen, a message from someone named Peter. My stomach churned. I hadn't heard that name in years. Not since Linda once casually mentioned an old high school friend who had been her first crush. I didn't open the message, but my mind raced with questions. Who was Peter? What did he want after all this time? And why did Linda feel the need to hide these conversations from me? The distance between us was no longer subtle. It was growing, stretching like a shadow that threatened to engulf everything we'd built. I knew I had to address it, but a voice in the back of my mind whispered a terrifying possibility. What if I wasn't ready for the answers? It wasn't until the night the storm hit that I finally confronted it all. The winds howled outside, shaking the windows, but inside, there was an eerie calm. Linda sat at the kitchen table, a soft light from the chandelier casting gentle shadows across her face. She was holding something in her hands, crumpled slightly from nervous fingers, an envelope. She hadn't seen me enter the room, and I almost turned back, unsure if I should interrupt whatever moment she was having. But something in the air stopped me, a sense of foreboding that urged me to stay. It felt like everything had been building up to this one moment. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Linda, what's going on? You've been so distant lately." The words left my mouth before I could stop them, but they felt like a demand rather than a question. I didn't know why, but I could feel the walls between us thickening with every passing second. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in weeks, I saw real vulnerability. She stood slowly, clutching the envelope to her chest like a lifeline. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this," she said, her voice trembling. "But it's time you knew the truth." I braced myself for something, a confession of some kind, a long-buried resentment, maybe even an affair. But nothing could have prepared me for the words that came next. "I've been seeing Peter again," she said, her gaze dropping to the envelope in her hands. "Not just talking. We've been meeting regularly." The floor seemed to slip out from under me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, the room spun. I felt like I was standing in someone else's life, not my own. "Peter?" I repeated, the name suddenly feeling foreign on my tongue. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she continued. "He reached out a few months ago. At first, it was innocent, just a few messages here and there. But then, it became something else. I didn't want to admit it to myself, but my feelings for him, they started to come back. And I couldn't ignore them anymore." My mind raced as I tried to process the words. Peter was a name from the past, a part of her life I never questioned. But now, hearing it again, it felt like a betrayal of everything we had built together. "What does that mean for us?" I asked, my voice shaking despite myself. "What do you want, Linda?" She paused, her eyes glistening with tears, and then came the most crushing twist of all. "I can't stay with you, not like this. I'm in love with him, and I need to explore what that means, for me. For us." I felt a pang of something sharp, grief, maybe, or disbelief, cut through me. After all these years, how could she choose someone else? How could she throw away everything we had over a man from her past? But what hurt more than the idea of losing her was the realization that, somewhere along the way, I had missed the signs. All those little moments, the distance growing between us, were not just signs of her becoming distant. They were signs that she had already chosen her path. My world, the one I thought was solid and unshakable, was crumbling right before my eyes. There was no neat resolution, no moral high ground. Only pain, and the hard truth that sometimes love isn't enough. The days that followed were a blur of emotion, anger, disbelief, sorrow, each one blending into the next. I couldn't escape the reality of Linda's words, the weight of them pressing down on me like a heavy stone. She had left. Physically, she hadn't packed much. It wasn't about possessions, it was about her heart, and where it had already gone. The absence was suffocating, like trying to breathe underwater. I spent the first week in a fog, walking through our house as if it belonged to someone else. Her perfume lingered in the bathroom, the faint scent of her favorite candles still burning on the mantel. But the most haunting reminder was the silence. The absence of her laugh, her gentle hum when she was cooking, the soft tap of her paintbrush against the canvas in her studio. Everything was different now. She wasn't just physically gone, she had taken a part of me with her. I tried to reach out, text messages that went unanswered, calls that were never returned. She had shut me out. So, I did what I thought was the only thing left. I went to her studio. Maybe I could find some closure, something to explain how we got here. But when I arrived, the door was ajar, and I stepped inside to find Peter sitting there, his back to me. He turned around slowly as though expecting me. "You knew?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't speak at first, just stared at me with an unreadable expression. Then, with a slight shrug, he said, "I didn't want to hurt you. This wasn't supposed to happen." His eyes darted toward the canvases on the walls, but I could see the guilt behind them. He had betrayed me too, but in a way I hadn't expected. He wasn't the instigator. He was simply the mirror that showed Linda's true desires, the reflection she couldn't deny anymore. The air in the room thickened with the weight of our shared understanding. The silence between us was deafening. I don't know who she is anymore, I finally said, the truth cutting through me. The woman I married wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have walked away without a fight. Peter sighed deeply, looking down at the floor. She fought, he said quietly. But sometimes, the fight isn't enough. He paused, as if unsure of how to proceed. Linda was never happy, not fully. She loved you, but she was suffocating. She was waiting for something to set her free. I didn't ask for this, but she needed it. And that's when it hit me. She hadn't chosen him because of love. She had chosen him because of a need for something different, something she had been unable to articulate for years. I had been her security, her anchor, but I hadn't been the spark. I had failed to see that she was drowning in the safety of the life we had built. Her departure wasn't a betrayal of love, it was a search for her own identity, something she had lost along the way. I turned to leave, my mind racing, my heart aching. But then, just as I reached the door, Peter called out, his voice trembling. Wait. I paused, and without turning around, he said something that would haunt me forever. She isn't the woman you remember. She's not the woman you think she is. The woman you married died long ago. My head spun, my heart hammering in my chest. What did he mean? Was this a confession of his own guilt, or was it a cruel truth that Linda had never fully shared with me? I stepped outside into the cold night, the door clicking shut behind me, and for the first time in over 40 years, I didn't know who my wife was anymore. The woman who had chosen me, who had been my rock, had vanished into someone I couldn't recognize. And as I walked away, I realized I hadn't just lost Linda, I had lost the very idea of her. What would you do if the person you loved changed in ways you couldn't understand? Could you accept the truth, or would you fight to reclaim what you thought you had? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts on this painful journey of love, loss, and self-discovery. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to join me for more stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about relationships.